my motto, nothing's ever holding back.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Lone Road iRacing podcast. I'm Guy Robertson and thank you once again for joining me wherever you are in the world. Whether you're listening while commuting to work, walking your dog, sitting in your sim room contemplating whether that last incident was really your fault, or maybe you're preparing for your next race week, thank you for spending some time with me. This week we're talking about one of the most important skills in all of iRacing. In fact, I go as far as saying it's the most misunderstood skill in sim racing as a standalone skill set. We're talking about racecraft. It's a word we hear all the time. Commentators use it, YouTube creators use it, professional drivers use it, league racers use it, but what actually is racecraft? More importantly, how do you improve it? Because here's the thing, most iRacers spend hundreds of hours trying to become faster. They spend hours learning braking points, they buy setups, they watch track guides, they study telemetry, and they chase tenths. Yet many of those same drivers continue losing positions during races. They continue getting involved in incidents, and they continue leaving races frustrated. While another driver who is half a second slower somehow keeps finishing ahead of them. How is the question? The answer is usually based on racecraft. Racecraft is the invisible skill that converts pace into results. Today we're going to explore what racecraft actually is, why some fast drivers struggle with it, how you can improve it, common mistakes, advanced techniques, and I'll share some of my own examples on my iRacing journey. Then later in the show, we'll have this week's iRacing Agony Uncle. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let's dive into one of the most valuable skills you can develop as an iRacer. Let's begin with the obvious question. What exactly is racecraft? If I asked 10 iRacers this question, I'd probably receive 10 different answers. Some would say overtaking, some would say defending. One might say race strategy. Somebody else might say avoiding crashes. The reality is that racecraft is all of these things and more combined. Racecraft is your ability to compete against other drivers while maximising your result. Notice I didn't say your ability to drive quickly. That's a different skill entirely. Driving fast is one thing, racing other people is something completely different. You can learn a circuit, you can memorise braking points, you can nail every apex, you can produce an incredible qualifying lap. But none of these skills automatically make you a good racer. Good racecraft involves understanding people, understanding risk, momentum, and situations. It's the ability to make good decisions while surrounded by uncertainty. Every race becomes a constantly evolving puzzle. Let's use a simple example. Imagine two drivers. Driver A qualifies second and driver B qualifies 12th. Excuse me. At the end of the race, driver A has collected 6 incident points, spun once and finished 15th. Driver B has avoided trouble, picked smart overtaking opportunities, and managed traffic effectively and finished 4th. Which driver demonstrated better racecraft? It's not even close. Driver B, clearly. And this is where many newer drivers get confused. They see racecraft as aggression. They think racecraft means making spectacular overtakes. Sometimes the best racecraft move is not making a move at all. Sometimes racecraft means backing out. It means yielding. Sometimes it means sacrificing one position to gain 3 later. Racecraft isn't about winning every battle. It's about winning the war. Think about professional racing. Watch Formula 1, IMSA, WEC or BTCC. Drivers aren't attacking constantly. They're gathering information. They're creating opportunities. They're waiting, observing, and managing risk. The best racers are often the most patient, and that's a lesson many iRacers struggle with, particularly when we spend all week preparing for a race. We finally get into that session, the green flag drops, and adrenaline takes over. Suddenly, every position feels like life or death. The result: overdriving, forced overtakes, poor decisions, incident points, lost safety rating, lost I rating, and overall lost opportunities. Now, the funny thing is that racecraft often becomes visible only after something goes wrong. Nobody notices the incident you avoided. Nobody notices the dive bomb you wisely backed out of. Nobody notices the risky situation you identified 2 corners before it actually happened. Yet those decisions can have a bigger impact on your final result than any overtake you'll make all race. One of the biggest racecraft lessons I've learned over the years is this: finishing races is a skill. It sounds obvious. It sounds boring, to be honest, but it's true. Every week I still see drivers with incredible pace throw away races through poor decision making. The sim is full of fast drivers. The drivers who constantly gain I rating are usually the ones making fewer mistakes, and that's racecraft. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, but oh boy, is it effective. And perhaps that's the best definition of racecraft I can give. Making the right decision more often than everyone else around you. Now let's explore something that surprises many people. Why some of the fastest drivers in iRacing actually have some of the poorest racecraft. This might sound controversial. In fact, some listeners may already disagree with me. But one of the biggest myths in iRacing is that the fastest driver automatically has the best racecraft. And I'm telling you now, they don't. In fact, sometimes the complete opposite is true. Let's talk about why. Many fast drivers spend most of their time at the front. They qualify near the front. They start near the front. They spend most races sitting in clean air. Now, don't get me wrong, that takes skill, and lots of it. But there's an unintended consequence. They really need to develop certain racecraft skills. Now, let's think about it for a second. If you start on pole and disappear into the distance, how often are you learning overtaking, defending, traffic management, risk assessment, and reading opponents? Clearly not very often. Now compare that to somebody starting 10th every week. They're constantly battling, they're constantly assessing situations, they're constantly making decisions. They're learning racecraft every single lap. This is why some incredibly quick drivers become uncomfortable when circumstances change. Maybe qualifying goes badly, maybe they miss qualifying altogether. Maybe weather kicks in and the conditions change dramatically. Maybe they have to start from the pits. Suddenly, they're in a whole new world. They're surrounded by traffic, they're dealing with uncertainty. Suddenly, they're required to race instead of just driving. And that's where their weaknesses appear. I've seen this countless times in iRacing over the years. A driver capable of setting lapse times I couldn't even dream of matching suddenly gets involved in an incident after incident when forced into traffic. Why is the question? Because speed and racecraft are separate skills. Are they related? Yes, absolutely. But they are not the same thing. One of my favourite examples comes from my own racing. Over the years, I've had races where I knew I wasn't the fastest driver in the field, not even close. But I understood something important. I didn't need to be the fastest. I just needed to make fewer mistakes than the drivers around me. And that is often enough. How many times have you watched a race where somebody is clearly quicker than everyone else but finishes nowhere? They spin, they force overtakes, they get impatient, they pick up incident points, and then they get caught in unavoidable or avoidable incidents. Meanwhile, somebody less spectacular quietly works their way through the field. At the checkered flag, the supposedly slower driver finishes ahead. That's racecraft winning over raw speed. Another trap fast drivers sometimes fall into is confidence. Now, confidence is really important. You need confidence to race, but confidence can become overconfidence, and overconfidence can become predictability. Some drivers become convinced that because they're quicker, they deserve that position. So instead of asking, how can I safely pass this driver? They're asking, why is the driver holding me up? And that's a dangerous mindset because the driver ahead doesn't owe you anything. They don't know your lap times, they don't care about your pace, they're racing too. And one frustration enters the equation. Racecraft usually leads through the nearest exit. The very best drivers understand this. They don't fight emotions, they manage them. They recognize frustration, impatience, and they recognize anger. And they make decisions despite those emotions, not because of them. That's racecraft. Now, we're going to come back in a second and we're going to move into the specific skills that make up great racecraft. Because racecraft isn't one skill, it's actually several skills working together. We'll be right back. Whenever somebody asks me how to improve their racecraft, I always say the same thing. First, identify which part of racecraft needs improvement, because racecraft isn't a single ability, it's a collection of abilities. Today, I want to focus on 5 of the most important. Skill 1 is awareness. Awareness is knowing what's happening around you and your car. Not just ahead, not just behind, but everywhere. Great racers seem to possess a sixth sense. They always know where the other cars are. They know who's aggressive, who's struggling, who's quicker. They know who's likely to attempt to move. And the truth is, they aren't psychic. They're gathering information constantly. Every mirror check matters, every relative screen glance matters, and every observation matters. One habit I've developed over the years is continuously updating a mental picture of the race. Who's behind me? Who's quicker? Are they catching? Who has damage? Who looks dangerous? And who looks safe? The most important information you collect, the better your decisions become. Skill 2 is prediction. This might be the single most valuable racecraft skill. Great racers don't react, they anticipate. Think about the incidents you've avoided. Chances are you saw warning signs before the incident actually happened. Maybe somebody was missing apexes, locking brakes, sliding exits, weaving on straights, or driving over aggressively. The clues were already there. The accident or incident hadn't happened yet, but the probability of an accident was increasing. Good racecraft means spotting those clues early. Imagine you're approaching turn 1. A driver ahead has nearly lost control twice in the last lap alone. Are you surprised when they spin? Probably not. You were expecting it, right? And that is prediction. And prediction gives you time. Time to react, position the car, time to survive. Skill 3 is patience. And this is a skill most iRacers need more of, including myself at times. Many races are ruined by drivers trying to gain positions too quickly. They see an opportunity. Actually, let's be honest, they think they see an opportunity and they force it. The best racers understand that overtakes are often prepared several corners beforehand, sometimes several laps beforehand. Patience creates cleaner overtakes. Cleaner overtakes create fewer incidents, and fewer incidents create better results. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is that not every battle has to happen immediately. Sometimes waiting is the fastest option. Sometimes the driver ahead will make a mistake. Sometimes traffic will create opportunities. Sometimes tyre wear will change the situation completely. Patience isn't weakness. Patience is part of your strategy. Skill 4 is risk management. Every decision in iRacing or racing in real life carries risk. Every single one. Even doing nothing carries risk. The question isn't whether the risk exists, the question is whether the reward justifies that risk. Let's say you're running P8, 5 laps remain, you're approaching a difficult braking zone. You have a 20% chance of completing the pass. You have a 30% chance of both cars ending up in the gravel. Is that a good gamble? If I was a betting man, I'd probably say no, it's not a good gamble. Yet many drivers take that gamble anyway. Racecraft means elevating situations rationally. What's the reward? What's the risk? And is it worth it? The answer changes constantly throughout a race. Skill 5, adaptability. No race unfolds exactly as planned. Weather changes, incidents happen, drivers appear unexpectedly, strategies have to evolve. Great racers have to adapt. Poor racers stubbornly stick to a plan that actually no longer works. I've had races where my original strategy disappeared in the first lap. Maybe damage occurred, maybe rain arrived, maybe traffic changed everything. The drivers who succeed aren't necessarily those with the best plans. They're the ones who adjust quickest when those plans fail. Adaptability is one of the reasons experienced drivers often outperform quicker drivers. Experience teaches flexibility, and flexibility is a racecraft superpower. So now we've identified the 5 core skills: awareness, prediction, patience, risk management, and adaptability. The next question then becomes obvious. How do we actually improve them? Because understanding racecraft is one thing, developing it is something entirely different. After this short break from our friends at Outlap, we'll dive into practical ways every iRacer can become a smarter iRacer. Don't go away. We're having a quick pause here to mention our sponsor, Outlap, who are supporting the podcast. Outlap is built around the side of sim racing we don't talk about enough. The focus, the preparation, and mental work that happens long before the race actually starts. It's not about hype or loud designs. It's about process, patience, and showing up ready, whether that's in the rig or stepping away from it. If that side of sim racing resonates with you, you'll find Outlap quietly ticking along in the background. I want to thank Outlap again for sponsoring the podcast, and the link to their sim racing apparel store is in the show notes. So far, we've talked about what racecraft is. We've talked about why speed and racecraft aren't the same thing. We've looked at the 5 core racecraft skills. Now we arrive at the important question: how do we improve your racecraft? Because understanding racecraft intellectually is one thing. Applying it during a race when your heart is elevated, somebody's filling your mirrors, and your iRating is on the line is something completely different. The good news, racecraft can absolutely be trained. The bad news, most iRacers train the wrong things. And let's be honest, most of us spend our practice sessions trying to find lap time. We load into a practice server, we run laps, we chase sectors, we adjust braking points, we search for tenths. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But here's the problem. You don't race empty circuits. You race people. And people behave very differently from cones. One of the biggest improvements I ever made was changing how I viewed practice. I stopped asking, how can I get faster, and started asking, how can I race better? And that mindset changed everything. One of my favourite racecraft training methods is incredibly simple. Start from the pits. I know, nobody likes starting from the pits. It feels like giving up before the race has even begun. But hear me out here. Starting from the pits forces you to develop skills that front runners often neglect. You learn overtaking, traffic management, risk assessment, reading incidents, and spotting dangerous drivers. Every lap becomes a racecraft lesson. In fact, some of the most educational races I've ever had involves starting at the back. When you start on pole, your challenge is often speed. When you start last, your challenge becomes racecraft. You begin identifying patterns. You learn which drivers can be trusted, who is desperate, who is calm, and you can learn how incidents develop. Most importantly, you learn patience, and patience wins races. Stop watching your mistakes. Now, this might sound strange. Most drivers watch replays after an incident, and that's very sensible, and I promoted that on this podcast for quite some time. But there's another type of replay that's even more valuable. Watch successful overtakes, watch successful defensive drives, watch clean battles, and ask yourself, why did that move work? What happened beforehand? And how was that move prepared? Many overtakes begin 2 or 3 corners before the actual pass. The overtake itself is often the final step in a much longer process. The best racers aren't reacting, they're planning. What about follow instead of attack? It's another exercise I recommend. Pick a fast driver, for example, and simply follow them. Don't attack, just observe. Watch their positioning, watch their braking, watch where they place the car. Watch when they choose not to attack. This is something I learned many years ago. Sometimes the fastest way to improve is not trying to beat somebody, it's trying to understand them. Some of the best racecraft lessons come from watching experienced drivers manage races. Notice I did say win races. Manage races, winning is often the outcome. Management is the skill. One thing I've noticed over the years is that racecraft evolves as your iRating increases. The challenges change, the expectations change, the mistakes change. So let's break it down. Rookie racecraft. So what does rookie racecraft look like? In rookies, survival is racecraft. And that's it. I'm serious. If you're a rookie listening to this podcast, your number one objective is not overtaking. It's survival. Far too many rookies believe they need to race every car, and you don't. Sometimes the smartest move is simply giving a dangerous driver space. I know that sounds unfair. I know it feels like surrender. But ask yourself this. Would you rather finish 5th or prove a point while sitting in the pits? The answer is obvious. The rookie who survives often beats the rookie who attacks. Now we're going to move into D class. This is where drivers start learning combat. Now you need to understand side-by-side racing, defensive positioning, race starts and reading intentions. This is where many drivers become frustrated. They're no longer racing complete beginners, they're racing drivers with some experience. The field becomes more competitive, mistakes become more costly, and this is usually where racecraft begins developing properly. We're now going to move into C class. C class, consistency becomes king. At this level, many drivers are reasonably quick. The difference is who can repeat good decisions, lap after lap, race after race, and week after week. This is often where drivers discover that consistency beats heroics. B-class racecraft. Now, strategy starts playing a larger role. Fuel, tyres, traffic, pit stops, weather. You're no longer managing individual corners, you're managing an entire race. This is where IMSA, GT3 endurance races, and longer formats become such fantastic teachers. Finally, A class. The very best drivers understand something unique. Every battle has a cost, and every defense also has a cost, and so does every overtake. The question becomes, is that cost worth paying? Elite drivers aren't necessarily more aggressive, they're usually more selective. They know which fights matter, and more importantly, they know which fights don't. The most common racecraft mistakes is this next section. Let's have a little honesty session, because every single one of us has committed at least one of these. Some of us probably committed one this week. I know I have. The hero dive bomb. We've all seen it. The driver is 3 car lengths back. They suddenly decide they're the second coming of Max Verstappen. They launch, brakes are optional, physics becomes a suggestion. The result, usually disaster. Here's the truth. If the overtake requires the other driver to disappear for it to work, it probably wasn't an overtake. Racecraft isn't about forcing impossible moves. It's about creating high percentage opportunities. What about defending every position? Another classic mistake. Some drivers defend every position like it's the final lap of the Indy 500. Meanwhile, it's lap 3 of a 12-lap race. The result? Lost time, overheated tyres, increased risk, frustration. Sometimes allowing a faster driver through is actually the smarter strategic choice, particularly if they can tow you forward. Racing the wrong cars. This one took me years to learn. Not every car around you is your race. And let me repeat that. Not every car around you is your race. Sometimes you're battling a driver on a different strategy. Sometimes they're damaged, sometimes you are. Sometimes they're much quicker, and sometimes they're much slower. Great racecraft means understanding context. Not every position is worth fighting for. Emotional racing. Perhaps the biggest killer of racecraft. Anger, frustration, impatience, revenge. We've all felt it sometime. Someone bumps us, someone overtakes us, somebody squeezes us, and suddenly you're making decisions emotionally instead of logically. That's usually when races begin falling apart. The drivers who improve most in iRacing aren't necessarily becoming faster, they're becoming calmer. And the calm drivers, guess what? They make the best decisions. Okay, moving into the final segment of today's hot topic, racecraft. We're going to talk now about advanced racecraft thinking 3 corners ahead. So far in today's episode, we've focused on racecraft fundamentals, the skills that every iRacer should develop. Awareness, prediction, patience, risk management, and adaptability. But now I want to move into something a little deeper. The sort of racecraft skills that separate good racers from genuinely smart racers. The difference between reacting to a race and controlling one. Because at higher levels of iRacing, something interesting happens. Everybody is fast, everybody knows the circuit inside out, and everybody understands the braking points. Everybody's watched all the track guides. Raw speed differences become smaller. The gains now become from decision making, and that's where advanced racecraft begins. The first thing advanced racers understand is this: the overtake really happens where the overtake happens. Now, let me explain. Think about your favourite overtakes, the really clean ones, the ones that you made look easy, the ones where you simply drove past somebody. Those overtakes often started several corners earlier. The actual pass was merely the final piece of a much larger puzzle. Let's imagine you're racing at Road America. You're trying to pass a driver before turn 5. Most drivers focus entirely on turn 5, but the experienced racer is already thinking about the final corner of the previous lap, turn 1, turn 3, and the run down the straight. They're building momentum, they're positioning the car, they're preparing opportunities, they're creating pressure. By the time they arrive at turn 5, the overtake almost feels inevitable. This is something I see regularly in the FIA F4 racing. The fastest drivers aren't necessarily braking later, they're often exiting previous corners better. They're thinking further ahead. And that's something every listener can improve on immediately. Stop focusing on the corner you're entering, start thinking about the corner after it, and the one after that. The best racers are really thinking one step ahead, they're thinking 3 or 4. One of the most fascinating aspects of racecraft I touched on there is pressure. Not physical pressure, of course, but psychological pressure. We've all experienced it. You glance in the mirror, a car is there. 1 lap later, they're still there. 2 laps later, guess what? They're still there. You start braking slightly later. You start forcing mistakes. You miss an apex, you run wide, and the inevitable spin occurs. The car behind you never even touched you. Yet they caused the mistake. But why? Pressure. This is a skill professional racers use brilliantly, and it's completely legal. Simply positioning your car effectively can influence another driver's behaviour. Showing the nose into a braking zone, remaining close enough through a sequence of corners, being visible in mirrors, and making your presence known. The driver ahead starts thinking about you, and the moment they're thinking about you instead of the circuit, mistakes become more likely. Now let's be clear, this isn't about intimidation, it's about applying control pressure, because pressure reveals weaknesses and weaknesses create opportunities. Another advanced racecraft skill is identifying the type of driver you're actually racing. Not everybody behaves the same way. In fact, most drivers fit into recognizable categories. Let's have a bit of fun with this. The defender. You know this driver. Every corner becomes a defensive masterclass. Every straight becomes a tactical battle. They're difficult to pass, but they usually sacrifice lap time while defending. The smart racer, they remain patient. Eventually, opportunities appear. Then you've got the aggressor. The driver attacks everything, every gap, every opportunity, every half chance. They're dangerous, but they're also predictable. Given enough time, they'll often create their own problem. Patience usually beats aggression every time. Now, we touched base on this type of driver in last week's episode, the nervous driver. You've probably seen these. The mirrors become their worst enemy. The moment you appear behind them, their consistency disappears. They begin making errors. These drivers don't need attacking, they just need observing. Very often, they'll make the pass happen for you. Then we've got what we're calling the calculator. Excuse me. They're often usually experienced racers. They're calm, measured, and strategic. They're always thinking. Battling these drivers requires patience because they really give away free positions. Identifying driver personalities can completely change how you approach a battle. The same overtake strategy won't work on every opponent. Great racecraft means adapting. Now, let's talk about something many listeners encounter in IMSA: traffic, specifically multi-class traffic. This is where racecraft becomes incredibly important because, unlike single class racing, not everybody around you is racing the same event. A GTP driver sees the circuit differently to a GT3 driver. A GT3 driver sees a circuit differently to an LMP2. Problems arise when drivers expect others to behave exactly as they would. The key lesson here is predictability. Not speed, not aggression, but predictability. The safest driver in traffic is usually the predictable one. Hold your line, make intentions clear. Avoid sudden movements. Allow faster classes to understand what you're doing. One thing I've learned through IMSA races is that hesitation creates more incidents than commitment. A committed decision is usually safer than a late decision, even if it's not the perfect one. Knowing when to concede. This is probably the most mature racecraft skill of all. Knowing when to surrender a position. Now, I already can hear some listeners shouting at their speakers, "Guy, I don't enter races to give away positions." Fair point, neither do I. But let's look at reality. Sometimes the driver is simply faster. Sometimes they're on fresher tyres, for example. Sometimes they're having the race of their life. Sometimes you're having the race from hell. Racecraft isn't stubbornness. Racecraft is optimization. The objective isn't winning every battle. The objective is achieving the best possible result. Now, I've had races where letting a driver through actually improved my finish. And why is that? Because I stopped losing time fighting. I settled into a rhythm. I focused on my own race. And eventually, positions came back naturally. One of the most dangerous phrases in iRacing is, "There's no way I'm letting him past." The moment ego enters the conversation, logic usually leaves. Many of you will remember a story I shared on the podcast earlier this year. I qualified somewhere around 17, nothing special, not a chance of a podium, not a chance of a win, but instead of chasing miracles, I focused entirely on racecraft. Avoid incidents, make smart decisions, respect risks, stay patient. Allow aggressive drivers to fight each other. The result, position after position, started appearing. Drivers crashed, drivers spun, they collected incident points, and drivers took unnecessary risks. Meanwhile, I simply kept circulating. As the checkered flag, I crossed the line in sixth place with virtually no incident points. Now, here's the important lesson. I wasn't the sixth fastest driver, not even close. But I might have been one of the smartest drivers in that race that day. And that's the point of today's episode. Racecraft isn't about extracting another tenth from the car. It's about extracting more results from the pace you already have. Because ultimately that's what separates racers from drivers. Drivers focus on lap times, racers focus on outcomes. And in iRacing, outcomes are what move your safety rating, your iRating, and your confidence forward. We'll be right back for this week's Agony Uncle section. This week's question comes from Paul. Now, if you listen to the podcast for a while, you might know that Paul has written into the show before and always sends in some thoughtful questions. This week he writes, "Hi Guy, I'm reasonably quick in qualifying and can often start in the top 5. But by the end of the race I've usually lost positions. I don't crash often and I'm not getting lots of incident points, but I seem to get overtaken more than I overtake. I feel like my racecraft is holding me back. How can I improve my racecraft without simply doing more races?" Firstly, Paul, thank you for writing into the show. Secondly, I think you've just described thousands of iRacers. In fact, I'd argue this is one of the most common stages of development in iRacing. You learn the tracks, you become reasonably quick, you can produce a good qualifying lap. Then suddenly you realise racing people is much harder than driving around a circuit on your own. The good news, racecraft can absolutely be improved away from race day. Let's look at some ways. Stop measuring success by finishing position. This sounds strange, but hear me out. Many drivers judge racecraft based entirely on where they finish. The problem is that finishing positions depend on lots of factors: split strength, track suitability, weather, incidents and strategy. Instead, start measuring decisions. Ask yourself, did I make a good decision? Did I avoid unnecessary risks? Did I identify danger early? And did I remain patient? Racecraft improves through decision quality, not necessarily through immediate results. The results usually follow later. As we've already discussed in today's show, use replays differently. Most people, and I've promoted it as I said earlier, watch replays after an accident. Instead, start studying battles. Pick a race replay. Find a driver who gained several positions and watch them. Look for where they positioned the car, which battles they avoided, which battles they chose, and how they set up overtakes. One thing you'll quickly notice is that experienced racers often appear boring. That's because they're smooth. Racecraft doesn't create drama, it creates results, and the results are what we are all chasing. I also suggest joining a league. I've spoken about this also on the podcast. Leagues are racecraft gold mines. Why? Because you're racing the same people repeatedly. You begin learning driver habits, strengths, weaknesses, overtaking tendencies, and defensive tendencies. Over time, your ability to read races improves dramatically. League racing forces you to think strategically. You can't simply throw desperate moves at people every week because you'll race them again the next week. Good reputations actually matter. Good racecraft matters. And that's why many league racers develop excellent race skills. Follow faster drivers. One of the most underrated learning techniques available. Find a driver who's quicker than you, then stop trying to beat them, instead study them. Ask yourself, why are they quicker? Where are they positioning their car? How are they approaching traffic? How are they setting up overtakes? Many drivers become obsessed with braking points. In reality, racecraft improvements often come from understanding decision making. The decisions behind the speed, not the speed itself. What about practice racing and not driving? This is perhaps the biggest takeaway. Most practice sessions focus entirely on pace, but races aren't time trials. If racecraft is the goal, your practice needs to reflect that. Some ideas, and again mentioned through today's podcast: start from the pits, join populated practice servers, run iRacers, join hosted sessions, and put yourself in situations where other cars are involved. Because racecraft develops through interaction, not isolation. You can drive 1,000 laps alone, but you'll learn more racecraft in one good battle than 20 solo practice sessions. Learn to predict trouble. This skill transformed my own iRacing. The ability to recognise danger before it happens. Think about the drivers who worry you during a race. What are they doing? Usually there are clues such as missing apexes, locking brakes, weaving under braking, running wide repeatedly, and driving emotionally. Once you recognise those signs, you start avoiding incidents before they occur. The best racecraft skill isn't avoiding accidents, it's avoiding being near them, and that's a huge difference. Paul, if I could go back and give you my 2020 one piece of racecraft advice, it would be this: stop trying to win every corner. Early in my iRacing career, I treated every battle as if it needed resolving immediately. If somebody passed me, I wanted the position back instantly. If somebody defended, I wanted through immediately. If there was a gap, I felt I had to take it. The mindset cost me a lot of safety rating, a lot of I rating, and probably a few keyboards. These days, my approach is different. I ask, is the move necessary? Is the risk worth taking? Can I achieve the same result later? And most of the time, the answer is yes. Patience isn't giving up. Patience is racecraft. And racecraft usually beats aggression over the course of a race. Final thoughts for you, Paul. Based on your question, I don't think your problem is speed. You're already qualified near the front. This tells me you have the pace. Your next step is learning how to convert the pace into results. Focus on the 5 skills that we've talked about today: patience, prediction, replay analysis, league racing, and studying stronger drivers. Most importantly, stop thinking of racecraft as overtaking. Think of it as decision making, because every race is simply a series of decisions. Make good enough ones and the results take care of themselves. Thanks for writing in, Paul, really appreciate it. Excuse me. If you'd like your question featured in a future episode of the iRacing Agony Uncle, you can get in touch through the podcast channels. No question is too simple, no question is too complicated. Because if you're wondering about it, chances are somebody else in the community is wondering about the same thing. Okay, to close today's podcast. Today, we've explored one of the most important and misunderstood skills in iRacing, racecraft. We've learned that racecraft isn't just overtaking, it's awareness, prediction, patience, risk management, and adaptability. Excuse me. Most importantly, it's around decision making, because anybody can drive quickly when they're alone. The real challenge begins when another car appears in the mirrors. As always, thank you for joining me on the Load Road iRacing podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider following, subscribing, and sharing it with a fellow iRacer. Huge thank you once again to our sponsor, Outlap. Remember, focus, prepare, perform. Until next time, race hard, race smart, and I'll see you on the virtual track. Take care, everybody, and don't forget to say hello on the grid. Happy iRacing, and I'll see you next week.
Whatever it takes, we're racing, we're in the zone. Whatever it takes, we push hard, never alone. speed is my motto, nothing's ever holding back. Whatever it takes, we're racing, we're in the zone.